Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another live stream. This is Brandon Hicks with the Orange Guilds, and tonight on the channel we're going to be continuing the project for the Pixar-style ball character that we've been working on since last night. Oops, just a second. Let me turn off my sound for the stream so I'm not picking that up. Sorry about that. All right, so as we get into the stream tonight, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the character and talking specifically about rigging tonight and some things we can do to kind of get the ball in a better place as we move forward. So let's take a look at what we're working on and jump in. So let me switch my screen over and let's get to it. Okay. So got my live chat working again. So if anybody's in the chat tonight, I am listening and watching. So definitely let me know if you would like me to talk about something specific or go back over something, and I'm happy to do that for you guys. All right, so I did some tests last night with 2.8, and we're gonna run into some issues probably as we get through tonight, and specifically getting into certain sections with the animation features, because they're not all quite bug-free yet. So just bear in mind that we are gonna be saving quite often, and we might possibly have to switch back into 2.79 for some demonstration purposes. But for the most part, I'm gonna try to keep it in 2.8 for you guys, because that's where we need to be staying to learn it. All right, so let's talk about where we ended up last night. So I ended up going back in and kind of rebuilding the file that I had last night so I could keep working on stuff. So just as a reminder, we went in, we created sort of a backdrop, sharpened up the edges here so that with the subsurf on, we're going to be able to keep those creases. And this is just a nice backdrop. If I turn on my shaded view, you can see with cycles kind of what we're getting here. Switch this to full screen so you guys can see this. So we got a few lights, basic 3-point lighting setup here. And then we've got our ball. The ball is basically just a sphere, and then on top of that, we've projected some stripes, and so we're creating this beach ball style character. We're going to try to do it in a little bit of a stylized way. That way we can capture some of that Pixar style quality. So let's get into what we need to do to continue this tonight. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things to do with rigging, as I mentioned, and as we get in here and start working on things, we need to keep in mind that we want to try to go for simplicity when we rig this up. The whole idea of adding custom controls and all the stuff we need to do for animation purposes is so that we're not having to run into 2, 3, 4, 5 locations to kind of keyframe the animation, and it's to speed things up. So we don't just want to be adding controls to add controls. We want to kind of think this through and make a plan and then kind of stick to that. But before we get into all of that, we need to kind of see what the ball is set up like right now and kind of review what we have going on. And then we can talk about how to start setting up this rig. So just as a reminder, we're now working with collections instead of layers. And if you're used to using the keyboard shortcut keys, hotkeys at the top of your keyboard for layers, it's the same way with these collections. So if I hit 1, it's going to take my first collection, make that visible. So all my background objects are supposed to be in here. Looks like we've actually got the ball stripes in there. So I actually want to move those into the ball collection here. So we'll just drag that in, and you're going to see that it should actually go in and then turn off. But in this case, I'm going to have to hit 1 on the keypad again to actually get this to switch back to just the background collection. So everything else is hidden. So if I hit 2, it's going to switch to the ball collection. 3 is going to switch to it should switch to this collection, but for some reason that's not working. Okay, 1, 2 is the ball controls, 3 is the ball. So this is just going to make it a little easier. At some point we can just keep layers 2 and 3 on and animate with these. And if we want to leave the background off, we can do that as well. At any point in time, you can hit Alt-H to unhide all of your collections, and that way everything's showing visible here. Okay, so as far as the ball goes, we basically just have a sphere, and we've subsurfed that, added a cast modifier to give it a bit more of a spherical shape, and then we went in and had an armature in here that I'm going to show you guys how to add tonight. So then we have the stripes, which if we look in edit mode are basically just these simple polygon shapes. Let me go ahead and get rid of this upper menu here. And basically these are just straight up polygons with edge loop cut down the middle of each of these. So if we were to switch into face mode, you can see that these are just simple strips. And the way that I created this was to add a plane, add some loop cuts down the middle, and then delete every other layer here so that we only have 4 stripes there. And so to get these to wrap around, if I turn off each of these, you'll see from last night, in case you weren't watching, we've got the subsurf in place here. This is a value of 6 because to wrap around the ball and all the various things that are happening with these deformations. 6 is kind of the bare minimum that we need to get this to not go through the ball and have weird artifacts, stuff like that. So first we're going to smooth it with a subsurf, then we're going to do a simple deform, which is right here. And I rename this one to stripe wrap. And basically this is going to wrap these around the ball in 360 degrees. And so I used a empty to kind of place this in terms of where that is positioned on the ball there. And then we have some other settings here. We're going to play a little bit with this angle because you'll see as we try to wrap this around 360 degrees, it's actually going to butt the 2 ends of these stripes up together, which is really not what we want. So we're going to have to play with this a little bit. So put that back to about 315. And then once we have the stripes wrapped vertically around the ball, we need to kind of shrink wrap these to the ball itself. So then we have a shrink wrap here, which is going to kind of make these look like they're stripes on the beach ball. And there's a couple of settings that I actually turned on to help make these feel like they're part of the material instead of just sitting on top of the ball like geometry. So if we look at the way this is set up, we're using a project mode instead of a nearest surface point or nearest vertex. And project in a negative direction is going to kind of suck this down onto the ball surface. And then we're also using an offset that's very, very shallow. So 0.001 for that. And that's going to keep them slightly above the ball surface underneath. One of the other things I did as I went in here for when we start rendering this is I turned off the ability for these stripes to cast shadows. So if I turn off all my overlays and we're just looking at the render here, the stripes are still selected. And if we go to the object tab over here down to the cycle settings, you can see that I've turned off for the ball stripes. Should have turned off the shadow. Don't know if it saved that or not. But you'll notice if you start using offsets that are higher than, so like 0.1 here, that's a little too high, maybe 0.01. Take a look at that. Kind of see what that's doing on the ball. I'm actually gonna go back to the camera here and maybe we'll do a border render instead to kind of speed this up. Okay. So what we should be able to see when we get close to the ball here with these stripes is that they are casting a little bit of a shadow. So if this is on, you're going to see as the offset is a little bit bigger, you're going to start seeing that shadow be cast. And so to get rid of this, you would essentially have to pull this down about as far as you can. So 0.001, you can still see a slight shadow on the surface of the white part of the ball there. And that's again from the shadow being cast. So if we just uncheck shadow, that's going to go away. And it's going to make it feel like it's, again, part of that material. So simple stuff like that can really kind of enhance your ability to get away with some interesting things like the rig here. So let's go ahead and jump out of render view and save this. Turn my overlays back on here and let's jump in and start playing with some things. So let's see what we've got rigged up so far. This outer ring here, as you can see, is called ball position. And so it is, it has everything underneath parented to it. So it will just control the X, Y, and Z position of the ball in our world. The inner empty here is called the ball rotation. And so this is basically going to allow us to rotate the ball so that the stripes are kind of moving around. And we've got some interesting things going on right now with the projection modifier still active, which is causing the stripes to kind of do some weird flare sort of things here. So we're gonna have to play with the positioning a little bit to clear that up and see what we can get. But we may talk a little bit about that tonight. And then, so this is parented to all the other controls inside are parented to this rotation. So we've got some constraints on some of these here. So if we look at the ball, instead of parenting everything, we've got some constraints set up to help us out. And so we're actually copying the rotation of the ball rotation control here for the rotation of the underlying object. And we're copying the location of the position there. So we don't actually have to set up any sort of parent constraints. Keep our controls separate in its own layer, and then keep all the actual geometry in its own layer. And then we've got some work to do a little bit here on getting this rigged up. So let's talk about what we're gonna do tonight. So the first thing we talked about last night controlling were the stripes. And what we want to do for this character is give the stripes the ability to kind of shrink and grow. And that's going to give us kind of an ability to add some personal expression and things like that to the ball. So there's a lot of ways we could get in here and kind of play with this, but we're going to have to kind of determine as we get in here what is the best method moving forward. And one of the things I want to do before we get too far in with all of the advanced controls for this rig is to just make sure we have the basics in place so that no matter which way we deform the ball, it's not going to break. So right now you'll notice if we start moving the ball around that just basic movement is not going to kind of break the rig or in any way. But the rotation, even in place as we go around, is kind of breaking. So in order to make this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to hide the backdrop. Let's just pick out the rotation here and play a little bit with the values and see if we can get this in a better place. So as I rotate around, we can see that part of what might be causing this is the some of these other objects. So first thing I want to do is make sure that all of the empties and controls and everything are actually parented correctly or constrained. So I'm going to go ahead and take my backdrop and pull it out of the view right now. So all these are disabled. And let's start rotating again. Make sure everything is still parented correctly or constrained. You'll notice that I locked the rotation values for our position empty and control. That way we are not accidentally picking this up and rotating it. So you're not able to do that. You're only able to move it around. And the same thing for the rotation empty here. So we're not able to actually move this around. It's just going to be something that we rotate in space, just like that. So it's important to do things like that because then if you're passing this off to an animator, they're not going to be breaking the rig or doing something weird that you haven't anticipated that's going to prevent them from using this to animate with. Because if they accidentally move this empty way off here and haven't paid attention to that, then it may break some other part of the rig, and it's an outward spiral. So you want to make sure you plan ahead for that, even if it's just for yourself. Make sure you organize that as much as possible. So this here is used to wrap the stripes around the ball. And you can see the position offset is kind of important because it's changing how these are centered around the ball. Same thing for the stripes themselves. So if we take a look at the stripe positions, as we move this up and down as an object, it's going to maintain its sort of wrap. But if we get into edit mode and position these around, it's going to have an effect on the ball itself. So you can see what that's doing there. So I'm going to undo that so that we're back sort of straight on here with the ball. And so it looks like from top to bottom, when the ball is not rotated, we are looking good. So the only issue we're running into is when this rotation is kind of getting rotated around to the sides. This is popping up. And so we need to determine why that's happening and kind of fix the slide that's happening on the ball. So that's on the x-axis. See if we rotate on the y-axis, the same thing's happening. And then if we rotate around the z-axis, looks like we're okay for now. So one of the things we might be able to do is play a little bit with the vertex groups to help the wrap not freak out as much when it's going around the ball. So the way that we would do that is just go ahead and create a vertex group that's empty here. I might call this something like sticky to determine how these stripes are attaching to the ball when it's projected. And then we can start by just manually assigning some of these vertices some values. So what we might want to do is go into edit mode, and then let's switch into vertice selection. And we might grab the top and bottom rows of vertices here. And then what we can do is manually assign a value. So if we assign a value here that it's a little lower, something around 0.9, and assign that, the values in the middle are still going to be at 1. So they're going to stick pretty much permanently to the ball here if we assign that. And then if you want to visually see that, you can jump into weight paint mode. And you should be able to tell what that looks like with these, but it's not looking like that's showing up right now. Interesting. So should be able to paint this, but yeah, I'm not seeing anything change. So let's see what happens if we actually select this vertex group for the shrink wrap. And so it is working, but it's interesting that we're not seeing that in weight paint mode. Okay, so I'm going to raise this up a bit more and reassign these values. Let's try 0.99. Okay. Okay, so now what I want to do is rotate this about 90 degrees on the x-axis, or maybe the y-axis there. And then let's determine if the vertex grouping is actually going to help us solve this issue. Not sure if the wrap empty is actually the problem. So one of the other things we can do here is actually parent the this empty to the rotation value here of the control. So control P object. And now if we rotate this, at least the empty is moving with the rotation. So sometimes that can help. And let's see what we got. So it looks like the position of the stripes are actually shifting when the ball is, or the ball is being rotated here. So see why that may be happening. First thing to kind of do is figure out the correct direction you need to go to kind of fix things. And then from there, determine what you need to do to kind of get things into place. So let's start by taking some of these constraints here. And what if we turn off our location locks and start moving this around? See what that's doing. So if I slightly pull this back towards the middle here, we can see that we're getting a projection that we're kind of expecting. And now if we position the rotation back to the middle, looks like we're getting an appropriate rotation value there. So what we may need to do is just go ahead and move this on the x-axis into place and then lock that position there. So let's try this again. So that works. Let's try -90, so that doesn't work. Yeah, so this is actually going to need to go the other direction if we rotate that way, which tells me that we've got a centering problem with the stripes here. So what we want to do is get this back to a normal position. Let's lock this into place, and then let's play with our stripes here. So I might move the middle of these up here like this. Let's find the center of the ball using cursor. So this is definitely the center of our object there. It's interesting, the shift in the way that's occurring. Okay, so let's start by getting rid of this sticky until we kind of figure this out. It's odd to me that these are deforming as we rotate. It's not something I would expect to see. So I'm just going to play a little bit with some of these values, and let's see what we can get as we play with the rotations here. So nothing that we're doing in terms of the settings in here are actually going to affect anything from the looks of it. If we turn off the wrap and this, rotate, we shouldn't be getting any movement, but I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be the case. So let's take a look here. All right, so the Y location is off center. Let's line that up on the Z axis. Reposition the rotation there. Let's rewrap everything and see what we get. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball the position here. So that's not kind of fixing it for us. Okay, I'm gonna have to get in here and play a little bit more with this setting and kind of figure out what's going on here. But let's move on to how we're gonna actually control the width here of our stripes. So the best way to do this, I think for this rig, is gonna be to use a shape key. So to get this in place, basically I've already created a base shape key here, and you're gonna need to create these in object mode. So let's go ahead and come in here with our base shape key, and let's add a new one. And for this one, I'm going to name this one stripe width. And so the idea here is that we're going to take all of these stripes while they're still sort of laid out flats in edit mode, and we can control the width of these using the individual origins snap pivot point right here. And what I want to do is make sure that I'm on stripe width. Let's set this all the way up to 1.0. And then what I want to do is kind of move these out to their biggest and widest variation. So I'm going to scale these just until I see them kind of getting close to touching each other. And then we're going to snap back into object mode here. And we're going to see how these are wrapping around. So you can decide for yourself what you want to do for the character and how you want that to kind of affect the emotion as you get through. From where I'm sitting, I think that it would be interesting to have the stripes be dynamic enough to where they kind of bleed into a full shade of color. So at their widest point, the stripes would essentially become a solid. So let's go ahead and kind of move this into position until we get that working. And just hold shift as I scale on the x-axis to get these a little bit wider. And right about here is kind of what I'm aiming for. Now, the reason these aren't connecting all the way is because when you actually get the stripes to this point in the width, the rotation with the simple deform, it needs to be all the way up at 360. So let's cap this out at 360 for now. Go back into the shape key here, and you'll notice that you've got a range minimum and a range maximum. And so for the maximum here, this would be 1. Our 0 would be back to kind of normal. And then let's say we want them to be able to go down to -1. So if we pull these down now, you're going to see that these stripes are almost disappearing. So we're going to have a full range of being able to animate from skinny stripes to fat stripes and connected. So 0 will be our default in the middle. And then again, at this point in time, with 4 stripes on the ball, the way that you're going to get this number is basically you take the 360 degrees that you have and divide it by the number of stripes and gaps in between that you have. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you should have 8. So you divide 360 by 8, so you're gonna get 45. And so basically to leave the last room in here for this gap, the math would be 360 minus 45, and that's gonna leave you with 315 degrees. So if you wanna leave that gap here and have it accurate, 315 degrees for this ball setup would be what we need. All right, so we're gonna have to play a little bit with some math to get this working for the rig in terms of the angle, as well as, based on what value that we're putting in for the shake key here. But let's talk a little bit about how we can get some other animation things in place here. So we've basically already got something in place for moving the ball around. So we've got something in place for rotating it around. We're going to fix the stripes at some point once I kind of figure out what we need to do there. But that's something we can work on. And then we have some other options we need to include if we want to add some more dynamic options to animate with. Okay, so what we're going to do is kind of add the ability to squash the ball up and down like this. And so to do this, what I'm going to do is use a bone. And if we go to add armature single bone, you're going to see that this sort of pops up into the middle of our sphere here. Now I want to move the position of this bone down to where it starts at the bottom of the sphere. So I'm going to jump into edit mode. I'm going to move the position of the endpoint of this bone -1 in the z-axis down to the very bottom there. So we have the bone reaching from the very bottom of the sphere to the very top. And now if we were to jump out of edit mode back in object mode, we can take this ball object, shift right click select the bone that we have here, hit Control P, and then we're going to use automatic weights to let this deform with the armature. So now what we can do is if we grab our bone, jump into pose mode right here, we start squashing this by scaling the bone into the z-axis, you can see that the ball now has the ability to squash and stretch, which is very, very cool. So we're going to jump into another view here so you can actually see this kind of working. Not that in the rendered view because we make it a crash. So let's go ahead and leave this in, what is this, look dev? And we can do this here. Now you'll notice the stripes are still not moving in connection with the squash. So we're gonna have to play with that a little bit as well. But what we might try to do to solve this right now is to parent these stripes to the actual ball itself. So let's hit Control P, and we're gonna keep the transform, but we're gonna parent that to the object. And so now let's see what happens if we squash. So we're still not getting the same effect that we want. We may have to play with changing the vertical scale of the stripes in connection with the bone as well. I'm not sure yet. Could try to parent the stripes to the bone. Might try that as well. So let's use automatic weights, see what that does. So yeah, still not working for us. So we're gonna have to play with that as well and kind of determine what we can do with that. But this is how you would add a squash and stretch kind of effect. So that's kind of cool. So back in object mode, if we are rotating this around, we're going to want the bone to move with it. So let's right click the armature here in object mode, shift right click the rotation, hit Control P, and we're going to choose keep transform. So now if we rotate this, the bone will go with it. What that means is when we start animating, if we were to squash this down and then in object mode, rotate this, the ball would rotate with the bone squashed like that. So it's kind of an interesting effect. Okay, so let's also talk about something that I was playing with a little bit last night, which is how to get the ball to stick to the ground. So if we are jumping back in object mode, what I want to do is, let's play with the squash of the bone here. Change this back to 1 so that our ball's back to normal. And let's grab this outer position here. So I'm going to turn back on the background so we can see the ground here. And then let's move around the ball. So as we're animating, what might be handy is to have the option to kind of get the ball positioned on the ground and then kind of turn on a value that would let it stick so that we're not going to have to worry about it coming back off as we're animating. So to do that, we're going to want to keep track of the position of the ball here in the vertical axis on the Z. So by default, it's at 93 centimeters in height off the ground, and we want to prevent it from going through the ground here. And so what we're going to do is play a little bit with some constraints and some drivers to help us prevent that from moving past that point. So let's start by playing a little bit with a constraint. So what we can do is play a little bit with, so we've got options here for floor, use position, optionally rotation of targets to find a wall or floor that the owner cannot cross. Let's play with floor a little bit. For the target object, we're going to use the backdrop. And then sticky is going to say immobilize the object while constrained. I'm not going to worry about the rotation here for now. But let's just see what this is doing. So right now, it's not letting us go past the floor, but it's using the center of the object here to prevent that from falling to the floor. So we don't really want this in this case because it's not going to take into account the fact the ball is already sort of 93 centimeters off the ground from the middle. So we have kind of an option here for offset. So let's play with this a little bit. So now if we are moving this around, it's not actually going to go through the floor because we've set this to the same offset as the height. So that's good. So now we've got the ability to kind of prevent this from going through the floor. But what we may not want to do is have this turned on all the time, because sometimes what you might want to do is have the ability to kind of play a little bit with the positioning. Maybe there's water that you're wanting to go through or something like that. And so there's other options we can get into here tonight for how to kind of play with turning this on and off. So I'm going to show you this constraint, and it may not be super valuable right now, but it's something that I want to kind of show you how to keep in mind because it can be very helpful as you get in here with using this option. So what we're going to talk about is drivers. Drivers are a pretty advanced topic, and I'm still learning a lot about how to use them properly myself. But they're going to get a little bit involved with some math, but don't worry, I'm going to try to take it simple and easy so we can get in here and play with these tonight. So drivers are really easy to get set up. Basically, all you have to do is find a parameter that you want to control by using a driver, and then you right click on it and you can add a driver there. So in this case, what I want to do is you just hover over any of these attributes here, right click what you want to control, and then you can choose add driver. So in this case, if we turn this off, this constraint, we are now able to go through the floor. And if we turn the sticky option on here, we are not able to go through the floor. And I was wondering if that would let us not come off the ground, but I guess that's not going to do that. So let's just add a driver to this, this little enable disable right here. So we're going to right click and add a driver. Now to see this, you're going to have to open up the drivers panel. So we go to the top here and click on drivers. You're going to see that the disable floor option is now right here. So we're going to left click this. We're going to hit in to open up the properties panel. Click on drivers. And now let's go through here and take a look at how to turn this on and off. So rather than go through all of the options in here for, the constraints to have to turn this on and off from here, what I'd like to do is start building out some custom properties that are going to allow us to do that straight in the 3D viewport. So we're going to go back to the object here for the empty settings. And if we look under the very bottom tab, we're going to see something called custom properties. So if we add a custom property, you may have seen this in a lot of other areas in the user interface before, but you probably haven't ever thought, what are these used for? So basically we can edit this property, give it a name. I'm going to choose something like, let's say grounded for the name of this. And then we are going to enable a value property of 1. And basically the minimum and the maximum are the only two things we're really going to worry about right now. Minimum would be 0, maximum would be 1, and then we're going to hit OK. So now grounded is going to show up in the 3D viewport under properties at the very bottom of the screen, and you can actually just toggle between 0 and 1 right here. So 1 would mean that the ball is going to be grounded to where it can't go through the ground, and 0 is going to mean that it will be able to go through the ground, but we got to set that up. So with this set to 1, let's go back into our driver settings up here. And you can see right here, we've got the driver here. It talks about what it is driving. And then you've got the type, and you can select various things here to help you show what type of driver it is. Scripted expression is what we're going to use right now. Driver value is going to tell you what it is using currently to drive this value that you're getting from the expression that you're writing right here. And this is basically just a math equation. So you can do addition, subtraction, whatever you want to do in here. And so what we're going to start off by doing is adding some variables in here. And right now we've got a blank variable, really not pointing anywhere. And what we need to do is have the option of the grounded variable that we just created inserted into here. And so what I'm going to do is switch this over to single property. I'm going to choose grounded as the name of this. And then we're going to switch this over to a property. Let's do, I think we're going to need to do a key. Let's try this. And then to get the actual, data path to this variable here, I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to choose copy data path. And then I'm just going to Control and V to paste this into this right here. So we had our first crash. There it was. All right, guys, let me pull this back up real fast. Okay, so let's set this up quickly again. Get back into place here. So let's go back to the constraints. Grab this. We're going to choose floor. We're going to choose backdrop. And yeah, so that should not go through. Let's parent the armature to the rotation. Okay, so that won't go through, but we need to increase the offset by 93 centimeters. Okay, save, and let's go back in and add our custom property again. Let's do grounded, and there it is. Okay, now let's once again switch back to the constraint, right click, add driver, and let's go back into our drivers properties over here. Select this, put up our drivers panel, and let's talk again. Okay. So you want to save a lot, especially if you're going to do this in 2.8, because working with drivers, if you enter in any sort of typos in the expression and Blender can't figure out what you're trying to do, it will just crash. And that probably won't happen when the final release comes out in October. But right now it's very buggy. And so you have to kind of watch that and make sure you're saving often. Okay, so once again, let's choose grounded for this option here. I'm going to use a single property. And then I want to use a key. We're going to pick the key from the option here. And then once again, I need to copy, right click, copy the data path, and then paste that into here. So it's going to use grounded. So now anytime I use the word grounded from this variable name in the expression, it's going to know that I'm talking about this value here. And so basically, we're going to write a little expression here that says, well, first let's just test this. It says 1, basically that means this is going to be on, and this should be active. And so if it is off, okay, so it looks like that's opposite. A 0 would mean it's on, and a 1 would mean it's off. Okay, so what we're going to want to do here is say if, basically we're going to first give it what happens if it's true. And so we want it to be 0 if, we're going to put this in parentheses, grounded equals 1. Then we're going to say else 1. Okay. So now that means if it's turned to 1 here, it should be not going through. If it's turned to 0, it should be able to go through. So we've got some issues we need to kind of work out here. And let's see what's going on. All right, so that's what I thought. Luckily, I just saved. Okay. Single property, key, here, and grounded. Okay, save again. So if we just put the word grounded in here, it's actually just going to use the value from down here into this. So 1 would mean this is on, which is going to prevent it from going through. As you can see, no matter what I do to try to make this go through, it is not really working. And then if I change this to 0, should go through. Looks like the path here is actually not pointing to the right piece of information. This red box is letting us know there's an issue. So it's not actually pulling that value correctly from this tag down here. So let's look under some of these other options for properties and see if we can figure out where this needs to come from. So let's go back to objects. I'm going to pick from the ball position because that's the one we're trying to come from for the constraint. And then under ball position, let's choose grounded. And then I'm going to click update dependencies and see if that helps. Okay, so that is changing the value over here. If you see when we toggle this, so 0 is not letting it go through, 1 is letting it go through, and there we go. Got rid of the red box and we're good to go. Okay, so that's basically how you set up some custom settings for your objects in terms of properties. And you can do this for anything. So anytime you want to turn visibility of controls on and off, if you see that in certain rigs, that's how they would be doing it, is by using custom properties and drivers. All right, so let's get rid of the drivers panel for now. And let's possibly talk about some other things we could do here. So we can also ground it to where we can't move it off of the ground. We just want to roll this around. To do that, we can set a driver into the Z location. And that would basically mean that it's going to keep it at 93 centimeters in height, no matter what we try to do in the Z axis. So anytime you get a driver in one of these channels or on anything, the driver is going to automatically override whatever setting that you throw into the property value. So just bear that in mind. If you see a purple highlight, that means that you've got a driver in there. And if you want to get rid of it, all you have to do is right click and delete it. But typically, if they're there, it's for a purpose, and you're going to want to make sure that that is set up appropriately. So I wouldn't mess with it if it's from someone else's blend file. Okay, so let's take a look at some other things we can work on tonight for the ball. So I've been experimenting quite a bit with some other things we could do for the rig. One of the things I wanted to talk about tonight was how to properly get the squash and stretch into effect with a control, because trying to jump into pose mode every time and do this is going to be kind of a hassle. You'll also see that if you are in regular constraints tab and you jump into a bone, it's going to tell you that you have to go to the bone constraints over here instead. So you can just click that and go here. And what I wanted to show you was how to use another bone to control the scale here, because in order to get the scale to work to squash and stretch the ball right now, what I have to do is right click and select the bone and then I have to actually scale it on the z-axis. Now I like the way that it's scaling. It's not scaling from the middle, it's scaling from the bottom. But I don't want to have to jump in and scale because that's kind of unintuitive every time I want to squash the ball. So let's talk a little bit more about how we would get in here with the bone and add something else. Now, I tried this earlier this afternoon and it's not working. So I'm gonna have to demonstrate this in 2.79, but I'll show you how to set it up here. First thing we need to do is jump into edit mode. And then we want to go ahead and add another bone. So if we just click the top part of this bone here and extrude it up, you're gonna see another little bone come out of that. And this bone, I'm gonna name a different name here. So let's name this squash and stretch target. And this one we could name squash and stretch. Let's just call it SS. So what we want to do is add a constraint to the original SS bone. So I'm going to add a constraint here, but I don't want to add an object constraint. So we're currently in edit mode and it's going to only show me the constraints for the objects. So let's switch back into pose mode and go to the bone constraints and set up a stretch to constraint here. You're going to see it turn green and then it's going to ask you for a target. And in this case, I'm going to pick the bone that we just added. So what this should allow you to do is right click this, and as you move this around, it's supposed to stretch this bone here. But I found out this afternoon that this wasn't really working appropriately. So I'm going to see if I can figure out why. And let's talk about possibly what we can do to play around with this a little bit. So ideally, you should be able to select this and then kind of move it, but it's not wanting to squash the bone here. So yeah, not really sure why that's not working in 2.79 right now. So I can at least move it around, but it's again, it's not really doing what it's supposed to do there. So let me switch back into 2.79 and show you the way it's supposed to work. I'm not sure if that's a bug or what's going on, but I'll let you guys know if I figure that out. So if we just add an armature with a single bone, jump into edit mode and extrude another bone up here. Same issue, we're gonna wanna jump back into pose mode. And then under the bone constraints, we're gonna want a stretch to, and we're gonna pick our small bone on top for that option. And now what you'll be able to see as we're playing with this is that it should allow you to squash this into place. So not sure why this is not working. Let's try a different rest length. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like picking the stretch bone is working. So I'm kind of wondering now if we go back to the other version here, what that will do. Yeah, that's not working. So I'm gonna have to figure that out, but basically that should be allowing you to kind of squash this down. Yeah, okay, so that's weird. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what we can do to get this into place. Now, one thing I wanted to kind of show you guys tonight was maybe a little bit of an animation example with the rig so far. And so we could try to get in here and play with that a little bit. Or we can keep going with some of the drivers. And so if there's anybody in the chat that kind of wants to let me know what you want to work on, I'll be happy to jump in and kind of experiment on a section to add that in. Just let me know and I'll be happy to do that. Okay. So one of the things I was experimenting with earlier today was a problem with the stripes. And so I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and then we may move on to something else. But the stripe distance is an issue as far as when we set this up with the shape key. So if we go down to a -1, you can see that the stripes are no longer in an equidistant measurement around the ball. And if we go up to a +1, we have the same problem. And that has to do with the fact that we're simple wrapping or simple deforming this around an angle that's constant. And so we need to have this as a variable angle that changes based on the width of the stripe here. And so what we would want to do is go in, add a driver to this, and then we would want to play with a function that helps us set this up. So let's jump in here, play a little bit with this. You're going to notice as well, which is kind of something that threw me off today that might help you out if you're doing this along, is that the degrees in the expressions in the drivers are in radians. They're not in degrees. So you'll see a value in here, 5.498. And if you hover over the angle, you're going to see that expressed in radians. And so bear that in mind when you're writing your equations. Don't write 360 degrees in here, 315, because it's going to throw the calculation off. So here's the deal. When the stripes are at their full width, which is a value of 1, we want the value to be at, well, let's just see what this would be. So at a value, which is, actually, I wrote this down. So let me jump back over and see what this looks like. 360 degrees in radians is 6.28319. Okay. So now if we jump back over into the modifier here, you can see that this is now set to 360 degrees. So when the stripes are at their widest, that's what the value needs to be. But when the stripes are at their minimum, we have to figure out what we want this to be at. So with a -1, there's actually 2 stripes on top of each other right now. And so we would want to pull this value down a little bit and play with this. So we've got some options here. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the drivers so it's a little easier to play with this value. And I want to kind of eyeball what this needs to be as we get in here and play with this. So I'm looking for a value that equally splits these up based on where that needs to be. It looks like 270 is what that needs to look like. So 270 in radians, and I'm going to open up a little text editor right here so I can keep track of all this. 270 degrees in radians equals 4.71239, and then 3. What did I say? 360 equals 6.28319. And then let's go back to 0 on the value here for the shape key. And you'll see that it needs to be somewhere in the middle. So 320. And this is 5.58505. Okay. So we need to find a way to map these values that are appropriate to all of the variations along the values here. And those need to update live as we're scrubbing through the value of the shape key. And that's ideal so that we don't actually have to jump back and forth and switch up these values manually every time we want to animate something. We might as well use these mathematical properties to our advantage. So we're going to jump back into the settings here for our deform angle. Right click, and I'm going to insert a driver. left click to select, hover over the drivers, and now let's go ahead and grab this here. So just to make this simple so I don't have to keep typing these in over and over again, what I want to do is go ahead and add a variable. And I actually may want to add a constant value. So let's see if there's a way to do that. Not sure if there is. Let's try. Let's see if there's an option here for that. Not seeing one. So we may actually have to type these in, which is kind of unfortunate, but until I can figure that out, we can do it that way. Well, actually, we don't have to do that. We can actually add a custom property and do it that way. So let's jump into these here. Let's add a custom property. This one will call 270. Well, actually, let's name this a little bit more appropriately. So we'll say stripe. All right, stripe S for small. Property here will be 4.71239, because remember we're using radians. Add another value here. Stripe M for stripe medium. This would be 5.58505. We'll add another one. Call this one stripe L. And this one will be 6.28319. So basically we're just writing shorthand values for all of these radians, which are actually degrees. Hope that's not too confusing. Okay, so now what we should be able to do is choose a variable, a single property. We'll choose a object, and then we'll choose, in this case, we want this to be on the ball stripes here. And then we're going to choose this path. Now we're going to have to right click over this, choose copy data path, and then paste this into place. So this will be stripe S for small. We're going to add another one. This is going to be stripe M. We're going to add another one, and this is going to be stripe L. Okay, so these will be a little easier to set up. There we go. Okay, so now if we type in stripe S, we should see the value here be 270, which we do. Stripe M, we're going to see the value change to 320, and then stripe L, we see the value change to 360. There we go. Okay, so that's the first step in kind of getting these all into place. And now that we've got all of these kind of lined up, we can use these to write an expression. So there are ways to write longer expressions with files. And so I haven't really experimented with that yet, but I may do that later on tonight. You can actually write a full expression with an if statement inside of the line here, but it's going to be all in one line. So basically, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it would be, we could say if we want 270 to show up, which would be stripe S, if in this case, oops, that's what I mean about the crashes. So gotta make sure we have the full expression in there before we get that set up. So again, luckily we just saved. So sorry about this, guys. I know it's kind of frustrating, but this is the price of using 2.8 before it is 100% production ready. Okay, save again, and here we go. All right. So we're going to check on the value of this right here. We're going to want to copy the data path to our shape key, and then we're going to want to add one more of the input variables. So this one's going to be just type s width. We'll choose key because we're working with a shape key. And let's paste that into here. So this prevents us from having to type all of this up here in this line. So stripe m if s width equals 0. Okay. I forgot, we gotta use two equal signs. There we go. Paste, save. All right, stripe m if s width equals 0. Nope, that should have worked. Okay, that works. Try typing in s width, so that works. Let's try typing a full if else. Maybe that's what's causing this to be a problem. S width equals 0 else 1. Yep, that's it. Okay, save. All right, so now what we should see is this switching based on where we're at, and this will only be affected, so we may want to change this to less than 0 instead of just 0, because we have to bit this exactly on 0 for us to see a change. So anytime this is less than 0, we're going to see this be at the medium value, and you can check that by checking here, 320, and then anytime we scrub above a 0, you're going to see this switch to a 1. Which is in radians, so you're going to get a 57-degree output. So in this case, we wouldn't want that. We would want maybe stripe L. We'll write another if statement in here. This would be negative 0.25. That did not work. Okay, so this should mean anytime we're less than 0.25, 0.5 instead, we're going to use this smallest angle here. There we go. And then we want to check for the middle value, which would technically only be 0, but we're going to want to write an else if statement. So I'm going to look this up real fast to make sure I'm doing this correctly. And frequently with coding, you're going to have to check out some Python examples to see if you can get this in the right place. So maybe we can just piggyback these else statements as we go. It's frustrating. Okay. So now anytime we're less than that, it's going to switch to our median value. And then for up here, we would need to write another expression. Now, again, it's going to be very hard to kind of do all of this in one line. And so probably what I want to do is create an actual file and pull in a script for this. So let me check on how to do that appropriately. And we can try that out. All right, I'm gonna leave that for now, and we can get back into that at some other point when I'm a little bit more far along on the drivers thing, because I don't want to end up wasting the rest of our time on just drivers. All right, so that's the beginning of getting the width thing in place. I'm gonna have to do some more debugging and figure out how to do a proper script on that. But let's get into maybe playing a little bit with some animation tonight. So I'm gonna pull this over a little bit, jump into our dope sheet, and let's pull this up. Okay. So in this case, I want to keep the backdrop on, but I'm going to go ahead and turn off everything else. I also want to lock the backdrop so I can't select it. And so now everything that is selectable should be here. I don't want the stripes wrap to be available or selectable, so I'm going to get rid of that. And everything else should be there. So ball is also something I'm going to turn off for selecting. So that way the only thing we can actually move around and click on are the controls for the animation. Okay, so for right now, since we're not in a place to have this work with the stripes, I'm also going to hide the armature. And let's just play with some simple animation for the ball tonight. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move this over a little bit. Let's save this as another version. And let's move this over on the y-axis. So in this case, we'll turn our grounded on, so we can't go through. So again, with this off, with this on to 1, it's going through, and with it off, it is not going through. So we may have to switch that at some point, but for now, we have this inability to go through the ground, which is good. And now what I want to do is create sort of a bouncing ball, maybe a rolling effect. And so let's just start with some basic keyframes. And what you can do if you want to auto keyframe is you can turn on this button down here. And anytime you move something, it will automatically insert a keyframe for whatever you change. So sometimes that can be useful. In this case, let's go ahead and play a little bit with that. So for this first section, I just want to move this ball up here so that it starts from a height. And then what I want to do is pick how many frames forward I want to go. So let's keep this simple and just go in increments of 10 for now. And let's bring this down. And that'll drop it straight to the ground. Again, because we have this on, we can't go through it, which is nice. We'll come back up here. Here, here. If you want, you can use the up and down arrow keys to shift between your current keyframes. And then you can use the left and right arrow keys to go up in increments. So this would then come back down. So that's the effect we're having so far. Back up, back down, back up, back down, back up, and back down. Okay, so let's take a look at this, play it back, and kind of see what might be an issue. So we're going to put our end frame at 120, and then let's just play back. Okay, so we can see we definitely have an animation. It's not particularly realistic or interesting right now, but it is definitely an animation. So let's talk about why this isn't working and how we need to kind of improve on some of this. So what you saw me do in the beginning was just randomly kind of positioning things around and trying to get a good feel for where things need to go. This is not really the best way to kind of animate. And what you saw me do was animate sort of straightforward and section by section all the way through the timeline. And again, not the best way to kind of do this. So what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight is some workflow for animation and how to keep things properly going so that you keep organized and it's a faster way to kind of get through the whole thing. And we're going to have to go from general to specific the way we would normally do for a model or anything else. So let's talk about how to kind of get rid of these and improve on what we were doing. So I'm going to select all of these. You can do the same thing in the dope sheet here, hit X, and I'm going to delete the keyframes. All right, let's go back to frame 1. Grab our movement here, and instead of moving that, first I'm going to disable the automatic keyframes, and then let's just move this over to here. Okay, so before we get into the bouncing and all that sort of stuff, let's just create a ball that rolls across the ground. So we want basically point A, point B. So we'll insert a keyframe, and in this particular case, the only thing we really need to move is the Y coordinate because we're looking straight on from the side. So let's ignore all the other values and just keyframe the one that matters, which is the Y coordinate. So we're going to right click and we're going to insert a single keyframe. You're going to see the object transforms Y location here in your dope sheet, and then that's the only thing that gets keyed. And just as a general rule of thumb, you don't want to key anything extra that you don't need to key because it's going to add more problems down the road. So in this case, we will go to maybe frame 100 and we'll move this across the screen in the Y direction to about here. And we're going to right click and insert a single keyframe. So now we have 2 keyframes from point A to point B. And if we play this now, you're going to notice that it speeds up towards the middle and then slows back down towards the end. So it goes from slow to fastest to slow again. And this is sort of the default behavior with keying keyframes in Blender, which is sort of a linear interpolation typically. And then what you're going to get if you look in the graph editor is actually a Bezier sort of transform. So if we open up another window here and we switch this to the graph editor, you're going to see that as we play with, you have to have the right thing selected. There we go. Okay, you can see how it kind of ramps into a curve and then sort of ramps back out. And so the reason it's speeding up in the middle is because it starts off slow with a graph sort of constantly even across the x-axis. As you get towards the middle, it's going to constantly speed up till it evens out in a straight line, and then it's going to curve back to where it's horizontal again. But these transitions are smooth, and so that's why you're getting this speed change effect. So if you want this to be constant, what you need to do is actually hit V, and then you want to choose an option that lets you grab these handles and make them straight. So in this case, we choose vector. It's going to straighten these out for us. And now if we play this, you're going to see a constant speed from point A to point B all the way across the screen. So pretty boring, but learning how to control these curves is what's going to make you be able to really add some dynamic movement to your animation. And so what we would want to do maybe is have it start fast and then slow down as it reaches the end and inertia and everything is kicking in and slowing it back down. So let's do that. Let's grab this frame and instead let's make it a really fast movement at the beginning and slow it down as it's coming to its final resting place. So now if we put that into place, you can see what's going on there. If we don't want it to be as extreme, we can slow that down and make it more like that. And you can use both of these curves to your advantage to help you get that into place. Okay, so that's just the Y direction movement. Now it looks weird right now because there's not any spin on the ball. So let's go ahead and keyframe the spin as well. And what we're gonna wanna do is by the time we get to this last keyframe over here, which is on frame 100, we're gonna want the spin to be at a stop, right? So let's go ahead and add a keyframe, and we need to pick the right axis of rotation. So in this case, we're going to want to keyframe the X rotation. So let's put this back at 0, right click, and we'll insert a single keyframe. Okay, now all the way back to here on frame 1, we're going to want to rotate this in the positive direction, as many spins times 360 as we want to make this ball rotate. So I'm just going to pick a value. It doesn't have to be correct right now. We can always adjust that. But let's go ahead and insert a single keyframe again. And then in the graph editor, you can again see what's going to happen. So we want to mimic the speed of our horizontal movement with the spin. So in this case, let's go ahead and hit V and choose vector for both of these to start off with a straight line. And then we'll go ahead and speed this one up by bringing the handle back towards the middle here. And on this one, we want to drop this to where it is sort of horizontal and slowing into that, just like that. So now if we play this back, you'll see this sort of roll to a stop here. So again, I have no idea how many rotations are supposed to be in this distance. This is just a guess. It may not be correct, but again, we can either do really precise math to get that correct, or right now we can just do it by eye. And again, if you want to play with that value, if the rotations look like they're too high, you can change the vertical position of this keyframe right here. So it's right now at 875. If we drop this in the y-axis, it's going to shorten the distance of the rolls. And so now if you actually watch that, we might actually want to slow that spin down a little bit. So maybe we want a little bit more rotation. Okay, so there's way too many spins. We can start kind of like this. See what's going on. Now, I know it's shooting across the screen a little far for my taste, so let's go back to the positional spot right here. And I want to play a little bit with the keyframe for this position. So you'll see it here sliding a little bit, and that means that we've got not enough rotation. So we need to add a little bit more. So let's hit escape, grab the rotational axis here, and then let's pull this back up. Yeah, so that looks about right to me. And now that we've got it kind of rolling across the screen, some of the things we want to start adding in at this point are some wibbles and wobbles and things like that. One thing you're going to see sometimes happen with balls that come to a rest is they're not just going to stop like they're hitting a brick wall. They're going to kind of roll forward, and they might reset and roll back and kind of settle into place a little bit. So if you want to do an effect like that, I'm going to jump to the rotation on the end here. And what you'd want to do is kind of overshoot this curve. So if we select this here, and I'm going to move this over a little bit so we can see this a little bit more. If you want to overshoot this curve down a little bit so that it ducks back up towards the middle, then what you can do is add in a couple of keyframes by just Shift-D and duplicating these. And that way, what you're getting is this effect where it's sort of settling into place. And then you want it to be pretty subtle. So do something kind of like this. And we'll just see how this looks now. Yeah, shot back a little far there. So let's bring this back down. Scale in the curve a little bit here, and we'll make some adjustments. Now this one I want to be aligned. So that way, no matter which of these handles I pick, it's going to keep that sort of into place. We want this to be a really, really subtle effect. So once again, let's keep that aligned just like that. And then because we're going a little far beyond the end here, I want to bring this back to where the keyframe is at 120, which is the end of our timeline. And we'll just play with this here and see how this looks. Okay, so still shooting back a little bit, maybe a little bit late. So let's grab all of these keyframes. And instead of doing this in the graph editor, typically what you'd want to do is move the positioning and the timing for these in the dope sheet here. And so this isn't going to change any of your dynamics for the curvature for your animation. It's just going to change the timing of these keyframes. And so for the transforms, we're just interested in the rotational values right here. And so we're not going to be playing with the location at all. But let's just grab the rotation here. And I just want to move these in the x-axis back a little bit. And if you play with starting these tight together and then spacing them out as we get further along here, what you're going to find is that it looks like things are slowing down over time. And so that can give a bit more of an interesting effect. So let's play with how this looks. Okay, not too bad. Still think this might be a little bit high, so I'm going to duck that down just a little bit more. We just want it to be really subtle. Okay, now same thing with the rotation. When it gets towards the end, it looks like it's not quite getting too far in enough. So we want to duck this down a little bit more and maybe have the speed still be going a little faster here. So we'll bring that curve in to where the slope is steeper. You'll see that it's still spinning even when it comes to a stop. So that's definitely not what we want. So let's bring this back again. Okay, that's better. Okay, so there we go. Got a good settling into place now. And now if we want, we can go ahead and add some vertical bounce into this as well. So it's really easy now that we've got our start point and end points in the right place. All we have to do is pay attention to how we're bouncing this. And the rotation is already going to kind of be in place. So we're kind of done with that at this point. So let's just go back to our position here. In this case, what we're going to want to do is jump back into the properties. And we're going to want to turn grounded off so that we can go through. But in this case, let's go ahead and keyframe the Z location so that we're in the right place here. So actually, I forgot. We can actually come off the ground. We just can't go through it. So we're good. We don't need to turn that off. Okay, so let's move our graph editor back over here. In fact, let's just go ahead and get rid of it. And let's talk about bouncing this on the ground. So in this case, let's go ahead and start it off a little higher up, and then we'll have it fall as it goes from point A to point B. So now we're just concerned about the Z position. So we're going to bring this up so where it starts off maybe about 10 meters up right here. And then we're going to add a single keyframe. Okay. And then by the time we get over to here, we're going to want this to be back at 0. So we'll insert a single keyframe there. And then what you're going to see is this sort of ending in this place over here. Now, what we want it to do is actually hit the ground the last time, maybe somewhere right around here. And so we'll pick a spot and then actually bring this down to where it is on the ground from this point forward. And anytime you see these lines actually solid like this, that means it's a constant value all the way across. So you'll know that these aren't changing positions. Okay. So let's scrub back through a little bit here. Might actually want to come up a tiny bit. Maybe to about a 1. And it's going to break the constant hold, but it will make it a little bit more realistic there. So let's take the Z location, pull it back to there, take this back up over to here. Let's go a little higher, maybe a 2. I'm going to choose replace single keyframe there. Okay, so it's still a little high. So I'm going to move that one back even further. Take this down to 1.25. And let's play this through. Okay, so it looks like we got something kind of weird going on here. Looks like maybe our armature got stretched. So let's grab the armature bone here and see what's going on. Okay, it's back to normal now. Weird. Okay. Okay, so the first time it hits, bam, we want it to come right off of this and back up. So I want this to come back and put these pretty close together. And the only way to actually make that bounce feel like it's bouncing is to get in the graph editor and play with that. So you'll see as we look at this, it's going to look like it's delayed a little bit, and that's just because the curves are not in place. So let me show you how to get a proper bounce in the graph editor. So switch the graph editor, make sure we have the right object selected, which is our Z position here. And let's open this up. Let's turn off the Y location, just look at the Z location, and here we are. Okay, so to get this to look like it's bouncing, you're gonna need to have the curves come down and then back up in a very sharp V. So if we look at doing a vector shape like this is what's gonna add the bounce into the effect here. So let's pull back. So that does it. It's a little late still. So you want this to be very sharp in the way that it bounces. I'm going to create another similar thing here. So you're actually seeing the path of the bounce in the graph editor. That's the way this is working. So something kind of like that. I want to space this out a little more. Okay, and then once you have one bounce kind of into place, all you have to really do is duplicate this sequence. And you're gonna go a little higher each time. And every time it hits the ground, it's gonna be the same height, and you want the same sort of vertical V coming out of that. So gonna want these to be shaped a little bit more like this. In this case, you're giving a little bit more time on the back end than the front end for it to fall. So if we look at this, see how that's working? A little bit of delay on this one, so I'm going to bring this one back tiny bit. Okay, now I'm gonna want another little tiny one here. So I'm just gonna move this one down, pull this one in a little bit. There we go. So with each one of these, the bounces are kind of getting further apart from each other in terms of distance it takes. And actually they're speeding up a little bit, so you'd want these to come in a little tighter each time, as well as the height obviously falling as it goes. So you can spend as much or as little time as you want getting in here and making these precise, but obviously the more time you spend getting these into place, the better your animation is going to look. So okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add in some more bounces on the front end of this. You'll see by rocking the center hump sort of to the left, you're going to get one effect. And rocking it to the right, you're going to get another effect. So evening this out makes it feel a little bit more right in terms of real-world physics. And if it feels off, it's usually because it probably is in some of these little minute differences in the curves. A lot of times it is just going to be your timing that needs a little bit of tweaking. So pay attention to that sort of stuff. Each one of these bounces should be a little shorter in length than the one before it. Almost the point where when you get to the end, it's kind of imperceivable that there's anything even happening. Now you only have as many keyframes as, or as many frames in your animation as are there. So once you get down to the point where you're doing, you know, a keyframe every single frame, then you're probably getting too detailed, and you need to kind of work on just using your curves to your advantage. But even with just 5 or 6 here, you can see that we've had a pretty realistic, sophisticated bounce animation here for our ball, and it didn't take too long to do. Okay, so let's go full screen so you guys can see kind of what this looks like. And so I'm gonna go ahead and save this, switch into the look dev mode, and turn off the overlays. So there we go. All right, we've got 20 minutes left. So if there's anything you guys want to kind of go over, let me know in the chat. and I'll be watching for any comments. But we're definitely going to have to figure out what's going on with the stripes. Not really sure what we need to do to fix that yet, but I will figure that out. I'm sure it has something to do with the order of the modifiers and the way we have this set up right now. So we're going to need to kind of play with what's going on as far as why that's not working. In this case, I'm going to get rid of all of the ball controls for now. And don't need the backdrop, so let's just play with the ball a little bit. Get rid of this. I forgot. Collapse that. Center this up, and let's see what we got. Yeah, that's interesting. It's like the armature is deciding to automatically like collapse itself, which is weird because I'm not actually squeezing this. When I go back into pose mode, it snaps back to where it's supposed to be. So I'm not sure if this stretch has something to do with that, but I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of the armature for now. Let's jump into edit mode and get rid of this bone. And maybe that will fix that. So there's some other things that I wanted to play with the look of the ball in terms of getting this into place. Now there's a lot I want to do to kind of snazz this up, but we're gonna wait till the stripes are in a better place to finalize some of these details. So as far as the shading goes, if we just look at the cycles stuff here, I'm gonna turn the first layer back on so you can see everything. And let me turn this armature back off. Okay. So from a distance, the ball is going to look good pretty much the way it is. The only issue that we're really going to have right now are little details like the bump maps and the folds and things like that on these creases. So I played a little bit this afternoon with some ways to add those in. I'm not sure. I think the way I'm going to do it is probably with normal maps and not with an actual displacement. But we're actually going to need to adapt the displacement to where the stripes are lining up based on the width. So that's going to change and kind of be dynamic, which is kind of an interesting challenge. And then we're going to want to also add in some seams on the top and bottoms where this round part of the ball is placed. So in order to get this kind of into place, we can start by, oops. That was weird. Okay, let's do edit mode, delete. Okay. All right, so back on layer 1 here, save. Got everything still set up. Okay. We can play a little bit with doing this on the actual ball object instead of the stripes and see if we can get some extra modeling details in there. This won't be too hard to do with things set up the way they currently are. So I'm just gonna jump into face mode here. And let's go ahead and start by just making these all quads. And I'm gonna do the same thing for these objects down here. So I just like to do that with the triangles to make sure that I don't have any of those, even though on this particular object, it's probably not gonna matter. But in this case, we'll grab all of these Let's turn off the backdrop for now. I'm gonna grab the tops and bottoms. Let's inset these. I'm gonna pull those in just a little bit. We're gonna do the same thing again. Okay, so let's see what's going on with this. Not seeing any of the creases, which is kind of weird. Would have expected to see those with the subsurf in place. Looks like the cast is what's doing that. So let's go ahead and try to kind of fix this by removing some of our insets here. I'm going to scale these out a little bit, and then I'm going to scale these down. Doesn't look like that's going to let me do that. So we're going to need to switch to medium point. Okay, so all the edges here on the outside, I want to sharpen up. I'm going to see if that actually helps crease these after the cast is already in place. This will only work if we keep the subsurf live, but it looks like it's not going to end up doing that. So one of the things we could do here is actually use a vertex group to help us make sure we're not casting these portions with the model. So if we jump over to the vertex groups and we hit another vertex group, we'll call this no cast. And then we will say 0 for this, invert this, and then we'll say weight of 1 for all these other points. I actually want to grab the vertices here. I'm going to do this just to make sure I've actually creased these up correctly, because we're in a vertex group, not an edge group. So because we had some double edges selected there, I want to make sure that all these border edges are getting a value of 0. Then we'll jump back into the cast and select the vertex group. No cast. Okay, now that's definitely doing kind of what we want it to do, but in this case, I want to kind of figure out a way to make this work a little bit better than that. So let's add this one into the no cast group. It's a little bit extreme, so I think for these, I'm gonna want to select all of those, and let's give them a value of 0.5. Yeah, it's still a little extreme. It's maybe something we have to actually fix with normals. So it was a good idea, but because of the cast, I think we're gonna have an issue with that. So one of the things we might want to do with the way the cast is working right now is just go ahead and kind of get rid of that and see if we can just scale this down. Maybe that'll do it for us. So let's grow that out and delete it. I'm gonna join that up, create a vertex, and then we'll just reconnect this all back up. Okay, so now we're kind of back to normal. Let's turn off the cast and see if we can do this just with a regular scale. So I might try this in edit mode instead of object mode, just to make sure we're not actually scaling the ball in any way here in object mode. And we want to fix this a little bit on our stripes. So we're using no vertex group right now, but if you remember me earlier talking about this, we might be able to kind of fix our current problem using the same method we just did. So let's create the vertex group. I'm gonna call this one sticky. And we'll select the middle ones, make those at a value of 1. And let's see if we plug this in, how this is looking. Okay, helped a little bit. Not enough. So let's play with this a little bit more. Let's try 0.9. Yeah, it's not really doing what I want. So I think in this case, what we may need to do is play a little bit more with the shrink wrap. So let's play with the offset, and I think that'll take care of most of that. Some of this is still going to come down to how we fix the problem we had before when it's deforming on the animation. Moving this up and down might do the trick. Like that. Could also scale these in edit mode, and that might do it. Yeah, it doesn't look like that's gonna help in this case. Okay, once I've got this scaled into place, I'm gonna hit Control A and apply the scale so that it remembers how high that is. And for now, it looks like that's fixing it, but I'm not sure if it's going to do that. Yeah, it's still a problem for the animation, so we're gonna have to get back in here and figure that out. Okay. So yeah, we're gonna do the indentation here for the seams with the normals. We're gonna have to figure out a way to do this for both the stripes, which are separate from the ball, and the ball itself. And I think the only thing we're gonna need to make sure we do here is make sure that whatever's driving those normals is coming from one location and going into both normal channels on the separate materials. So that shouldn't be that hard if we use the same map. Or the same group, we can try that out. Let's play with the shader editor. I always do that, go to the wrong one. It's up here. Shader editor. Okay, now we can try to do this procedurally in Blender, but I'm not super confident that's going to give us the best results. The best way to do this might actually be to create an image map and bring it back in, and then try to apply that to the seams themselves in the 3D positions for the width of the stripes, and then project that back onto the ball. So we got a question in the chat. Puka Factor says, how about a larger space between UV seams? Yeah, so we haven't UV'd this yet, but something that could be necessary, I'm not sure. We basically have a vertex or shape key here that is controlling the width of the stripes, and these are separate objects. And that's going to be sort of part of the animation that we end up doing for this short film. So we've got a lot of things to work on here, but the main thing, if you look at some reference for a beach ball, I pulled this up earlier today, is you've got a lot of these sort of folds, and this is sort of from a beach ball that has been filled up and it's half deflated or a little bit under, or maybe it was over and it stretched it a little bit. But these seams on almost every beach ball have sort of horizontal stretch marks. So that's kind of what we're going to need to add back in to make this look a little bit more realistic, because it's just looking a little too perfect right now. It's kind of like this. And I definitely want to play with a little bit of the seams to make them look a little bit more interesting. We're also going to want to kind of drive some per stripe color options with the rig. So we're going to need to play a little bit with some ways to set those up custom. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed tonight's stream. I know it was a little bit unorganized and crashy, but anyways, I hope you guys come back for tomorrow. It's 7 p.m. Central Time. I'll be back working on this ball. And as always, if you missed the stream tonight, you can check that out on the channel. It's all recorded. And so as we get in here and work on this some more, we're going to be doing a little bit more animation, but we've got this kind of working in here from tonight. So kind of a little rolling ball animation there for you guys. And yeah, so play with that a little bit more. Anyways, if you guys have any questions or want to talk some more in the chat, I'll be available to do so. But for now, I'm going to sign off, and thank you guys for watching tonight. I'll be back tomorrow.